Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out tonight for Paula Wilson's lecture here. I'm Emmy Bright, and I lead the print media department with Cooper Holoweski, and we want to welcome all of the Cranbrook students and all of the prospective students who are here today. Thanks for coming to visit us. And we want to also thank Rebecca and Suzanne for coming to hang out with us tonight, and to the Applebaum Family Foundation, who is helping sponsor Paula's print project that she's doing with us here this week while she visits us at Cranbrook. I'm so glad you're all here. So I'm so happy to be introducing you to Paula Wilson. I met Paula about 5 years ago where she was co-teaching a class on experimental printmaking at Oxbow School of Art and Artist Residency. And I remember her talking in her talk about cannibalizing her prints, cutting them up, using them in paintings, laminating those paintings to wood, and then walking on them like carpets. And then her gallerist would call and be like, "Where's that print?" And I was like, oh, I love this person. So I've been following her work for a while, and I love the work itself because it's so exploratory, decorative, erotic, playing with the landscape, the figure, and still life in these most delightful ways. I think she emanates a kind of enjoyment that I deeply respect. Paula was a visiting artist when I was a student here at Cranbrook, and that was one of the starting points for our friendship. So when you love something or someone a lot, I always try to share it with my students. So thank you so much, Paula and Mike, for coming to visit with us this week. And if after the lecture, you also fall in love with Paula and her work, I'll invite you to come stop by the print shop where she'll be working on a print from Sunday through Wednesday next week. So come visit us. And I'll also share her formal bio, which is super impressive. Paula was born in Chicago, Illinois, and is currently based in Carrizozo, New Mexico. Wilson's most recent solo exhibitions were Entangled at 516 Arts in Albuquerque, New Mexico, The Light Becomes You at Denny Dimin Gallery in New York, and Spread Wild Pleasures of the Yucca at Smack Mellon in Brooklyn, New York. She has been recently featured in publications such as Hyperallergic, Artforum, the New York Times, and the New Yorker. Wilson's artwork is in many collections, including the Studio Museum in Harlem, the New York Public Library, Yale University, and the Saatchi Gallery. She holds a master's in fine art from Columbia University. And welcome. Thanks for coming, Paula.
Thank you so much, Emmy, and thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be returning to Cranbrook, as Emmy said. I came here 5 years ago and was met by this hand silkscreen poster announcing my lecture, which just illustrated to me so clearly the value that Cranbrook places in visual material with real presence. And then it's so special to be back on this campus when it's not snowing, perhaps, because I feel like this world is created and designed by an artist for artists. And being here elicits in me the feeling like I can design my own world. This is something that's possible. And then the other thing that I love about Cranbrook is that the student, faculty, artist, visiting artist interactions sort of break down, or at least those categories break down. And that's a very unique experience that I'm already sort of returning here and seeing that happening again. So thanks again for coming. I would like to start with an early body of work. I was born in the middle of the 70s on the south side of Chicago in a neighborhood called Hyde Park. I attended the University of Chicago Laboratory Schools, which was founded by the educational reformer John Dewey in 1896 as an experimental institute for learning. My father is William Julius Wilson. He's a very prominent sociologist in the field of race relations and urban poverty. He pioneered the now ubiquitous belief that when you're talking about the plight of the urban poor, you have to integrate class and joblessness into a discussion of racial discrimination. This is him in a mural in Harlem that I love. And he's recently retired and is meditating 1 hour a day. I feel like I've never been so proud of my dad as in this last, or I don't think he'd like me to say his last chapter, but, and he watches as much Celtics as he wants and seems to be entering a really joyful period. My mother was born in East Hampton, Massachusetts, and she had an abusive childhood and fled to the only place she could find, which was a convent, where she stayed from the age of 12 until she was 22. And she started reading Emerson and Thoreau and was like, this is the kind of spirituality I'm really interested in, and kind of never looked back. Has an adventurous spirit, started making art around the same time I did in college, and is a bookbinder living in New Mexico. And recently has started an incredible mentoring to students in literacy. My sister Lisa, pictured here with me in Ebony magazine in 1989, is a powerhouse businesswoman in the family. She manages global partners doing predictive cloud-based analytics. I'm the only one in the family who I think understands what my sister does. And then this is my other sister, Colleen, who lives in Chicago and is married to a cop and has 2 kids. But don't let that kind of pigeonhole her. She used to write lesbian erotica with a horror bent under the pen name Jolie Dupree. But then don't let that end the story, because now she has become an avid Trump supporter, conservative, and spends most of her writing time on Facebook railing against the hypocrisies of liberals. And my brother Carter is a spiritual seeker in the sort of Buddhist, Hindu, non-dual traditions. And he's a college dropout and became kind of really into playing video games and used that knowledge to sort of segue into some quality investments. And now he's sitting pretty financially. So when I set out to make a work of art, I'm particularly interested in depicting multiple viewpoints and multiple perspectives that can exist simultaneously. And it's something that excites me about being a two-dimensionally oriented artist, or even my videos sort of have a collapsed narrative. Because unlike film or dance or literature or even sculpture that sort of exists in our kind of bodily sense of time and space, an image, a print in this case, we take it in all at once. So in this print remodeled, you have this figure who's looking at this vessel, and she's kind of looking at the back of the vessel, so that as if there's maybe even a world unseen to us there. And then there is the whole sort of world within this vase. And in the background, there are these 2 brontosauruses looking at each other in this moment of consciousness or awareness. And the fact that all this plethora of diversity, both temporally and materially, the fact that our mind can say, yes, this makes sense to me, is a real wellspring that I draw from in my work. It makes sort of a diversity of an image come whole. And then one thing I love about generating prints is that you get these sort of multiples. So in an exhibition, I'll show multiple iterations or sort of incarnations, if you will, of the same print. And it sort of reminds me of how I was on a plane. I was in New Mexico 2 days ago, and now I'm here, and we sort of carry our bodies with us, and they age and change. This is another print titled Last Summer. It's a 2-plate etching with 2-plate silkscreen. And you'll often find in my work that the actual act of looking, the act of observing, is sort of the subject matter of the work. And so in this piece, you have this figure who's there's this light that's generating from their attention and trying almost maybe desperately to capture the beauty of the world around her, and almost creating a cage between her and her admirer. And one thing that I like to do, including having work that depicts the act of looking, is to reward the act of looking. So I do that in multiple ways, but in one way in which I do it is that there's a lot of detail, and so that when you're actually in front of the piece, you can experiencing things that you could never really truly experience by just looking at the image. So in that tuft of grass under her feet, there are sort of pleasures to be found. And then again, these pieces will get remixed and have new iterations that perhaps even say something different with the same material. This was a really breakout painting for me. It's about 4 foot square. It's called Tomorrow's Tomorrow. And this was recently after graduating from Columbia and just loving the freedom that I had in the studio, where I no longer in my head was thinking about how I would talk about this work. And I had this vision of a stained glass window cascading light on a vase of flowers. And I thought, I'm gonna work from this vision in my mind's eye, as if I was a painter working from a model or plein air painting, referring back continually to that image. And it felt like there was something that existed between these two objects, a dialogue, if you will, that I was interested in sort of listening in on, and that imagining that the material world has a kind of life of its own. So you'll see the figure sort of mirrors some of the colors and forms in the flowers. This was another important piece for me. Came at a time when I was really struggling in my studio and cutting up my pieces in order to get at something elemental. Like I would make a work and it would be in a big sheet of paper, and then I would be like, that's not it, and I would just keep cutting and cutting, and I ended up with these piles in my studios of scraps, and I just started gluing them down on a piece of canvas, and this figure sort of emerged on their own, and kind of set this other painting that was lying in the corner on their head, and we were ready to go. As Emmy was saying, I think it was a curator who said that I cannibalize my own work, and so the flesh from this booty came from this person's face. This is titled Self-Portrait with Bag, and I feel like this really pictures New York Paula, where I'm kind of on the way to the subway, I got my bag, maybe I'm walking by a building with some posters, and I'm sort of so focused, my hair just pulled back, that I'm kind of carrying myself, like I've forgotten my feet. I'm just propelling myself forward, in kind of trapped in my own mind space. And that was a painting I made in New Mexico, but this was my studio and live workspace in Bushwick, New York. And I loved living in New York and all the opportunities that came and the people I met, but I felt in some profound way that this wasn't the place for me. I felt continually like I was supposed to be somewhere that I wasn't. All the conversations I was having with friends was about real estate and what gallery we might find ourselves in, or how we could insert ourselves into this system that's already churning. Whereas the kind of artists that I respected the most seemed to find a way to exist outside of a system that was built for them, and as a woman of color, just didn't feel like the art world was where I wanted to kind of hang my everything. So when I was visiting my mom in New Mexico, I met my current partner, Mike Lag, and he was like, why don't you come move out to Carrizozo? So this is a picture from the gas station map where people are like, where are we? And maybe before the coronavirus, where they're touching the map and leaving this kind of dirty smudge. So Carrizozo is not in the part of New Mexico that you normally associate with. It's not Santa Fe or Albuquerque. It's in south central New Mexico. So it's the crossroads between Highway 380 and 54, but on this map it didn't even get a little dot. So it's a town in the high desert plains of New Mexico. It's an old railroad town, and the railroad rolls through but doesn't stop anymore. It's near the Valley of Fire lava field, which is a really special and beautiful place for us, and near White Sands National Monument as well. So you have this kind of black and white yin-yang thing happening that's really incredible. It's a town of about 900 people, and a lot of people are on subsistent living. There's a lot of available properties and also a really thriving art community. And you can walk from town and be in sort of a natural environment like this. And it's a town with a lot of retired people, so people are always telling me how young I am and how I have my whole life ahead of me, which I really love. This is our house, and this is the house next to it that we purchased for $5,000, kind of Detroit prices, I guess. And this is a mural that I painted on the house across the street from the Catholic Church, which caused a little bit of a stir. Although the father at some point told his congregation that it's a picture of the Garden of Eden. He kind of loved it, so he advocated for us. I would only hear about people who didn't like it, as in I really like it. I'm not one of those people who don't like it, type of thing. Soon after moving to New Mexico, I got offered to do a show at the Fabric Workshop and Museum in Philadelphia. And when I returned to a city, it was as if I could see the city in a way that I had never been able to when I lived in them. And I wanted to do this show sort of in homage of that beauty. And it appeared to me as if all the facades, all the kind of buildings in Philly appeared as paintings to me, and it helps that Philly has a really wonderful mural tradition. So we set out to make these large-scale works on fabric, and we utilized a lot of material that they had from other projects. One thing I love about cities is how you have one building from one architectural vernacular right up against a building that's completely different, and that these two things can kind of commingle excites me. You also see in my work that a lot of butts, and I like butts for multiple reasons, and because of the sort of the dichotomies that they hold. They're both classical and yet totally humorous. They're associated with black and brown bodies, but they're universal. And they're titillating but gender neutral. I also like them because they're kind of PG-13, so you can sneak them in without getting too much problems. And then in this show, we kind of mirrored the stained glass window, and it had a kind of outside and inside iteration. This is all silk organza with machine stitching as the leading. And this is another moment that I just love in cities where they are kind of painting themselves unbeknownst to us. So we made this spout that then kind of gave life to this weed. And then there were pigeons that are silk screened, kind of hanging out in the space. So after doing the Fabric Workshop project, I stopped working on paper and started transitioning to working on fabric. I really love now the sewing machine and what's possible, and the feel and the weight of fabric and how it can just hang and roll up for easy transport. And in conjunction with that, I started making my own clothes. So I'd say about 75% of my wardrobe is clothes that I've made or at least collaborated with other people. This is me getting my first In-N-Out burger. I make bags, sometimes to house painting, sometimes utilitarian. That's our dog Duchess. And here I am at Frieze, New York. I didn't have any work in that show, but I felt like just hanging out, walking around like this kind of made me a part of the installation. So this is a piece called City Girls in the Desert, and it kind of comes out of trying to figure out what does it mean to be a human being sort of out in nature. What happens in that space? What is our relationship to that, and how do our bodies interact with the natural world? And I'm one of those people who, if I'm at a beach, I could just spend hours looking for seashells. And around the railroad yard in Carrizozo, there's all these sort of pieces of another time to be had, to enjoy. And so I wanted to kind of mirror that in this piece. And then there's a little video inserted into this painting, and I'll play a little bit of that for you. This painting is called Sunflower Love. And you'll see that there's a lot of collaged elements. I usually will be working on one piece that I think is its own thing, and then next thing I know, it's the skirt for this figure. And again, this piece has a video inserted in it. I'll play that. So I was excited with that video to feel like I was able to represent a sort of personal sexuality without having it be lewd or overt, and to kind of have this sort of masturbatory pleasure so available, and in relation to trying to kind of this figure trying to capture this sunflower, as if, you know, when we pull out our cell phones to try to take a picture of something, really what we want is that kind of real hand feel that happens in the video, rather than what we end up with when we look back at what we've tried to capture. Out in New Mexico, we've started to make these rug paintings, and they sort of were born out of wanting to have rugs and not being able to afford to buy the type of rug that we wanted, so we started making these. They also are this format that can kind of stand up and exist on their own. I also feel like there's something to thinking about making a rug that allows me to sort of flex my making muscles in a direction that I'm not usually going. So this probably is as close to an abstract painting as I've ever gotten. I feel like anything is possible between tassels. And this also started as a shipping tube. So we made this to be like a shipping tube, and then I think Mike even collaborated with me on that one. This piece I made when I was really struggling in the studio and just wanted something that I could get my hands on and work. So I kind of meticulously painted all these tiles with little drop shadows. And here's how you can see how this format works. It's sort of these slats of wood that we then glue onto canvas and then paint. And they roll up, they can hang on a wall. It's just a very versatile way of working that I'm excited to continue. And so that rug is now in this space, which was our first space for MoMAZoZo, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. But at first, I want to introduce you to my partner, Mike Lag. There he is in his woodworking studio. And he was born on a farm in South Dakota and raised pigs during his during his college years, and left with $50,000 of income rather than being in debt. And then he was trying to make his way to California, but got sidetracked and ended up in the Navy. And so that picture is him behind the camera, taken of his buddies, which to me, I was like, really? That's the scene of the Navy? Like, that's what you guys are doing? And while I call him a woodworker, he's really almost more of an inventor. He doesn't really like to be called an artist, to be sort of associated with that, but he's a real creative force. This is some furniture that's going to be in the Armory show coming up. He does a lot of screen doors. You can see he does this incredible thing with the screen where he embosses it, and so these are all around Carrizozo. Here's some shutters, him at work. And these are his fucking chairs. So I'll be like, what are you working on today? And he's like, I'm just fucking making some fucking chairs. So they stack up in really nice arrangements. And here's a topiary that we're working on continually. So one thing that I really love about my life in New Mexico is that the sort of distance between art and life feels like it's continually being collapsed. And while I do enjoy, making work in the studio and then sending that off to be in an exhibition, I'm particularly interested when I can actually just curate a space within my life, within my world. And we, as a result, really welcome visitors into Carrizozo to be able to kind of share this installation that we perpetually have going. But I often do travel on engagements like this, and I'd like to talk a little bit about a project I did in Miami when I was in residence there. And I feel like place is something that's really becoming more and more evident to me that that's important in my work. And Florida is such a strange place. So when I was in Miami, I got turned on to this place called Virginia Key, which was relegated to being a blacks-only, a colored-only beach in 1945, and it only became integrated in 1980, and it was sort of this forgotten land. It became like a trash dump, and it has this incredible history, and so I decided to shoot a video there at that location, which I'll share with you. It's 3 minutes. So that piece was born out of me imagining my own artwork's creation story. So like that lady painting that you saw earlier, I sort of was imagining sort of anthropomorphizing my own work, or even empathizing with my own work, as if it had life, because I believe it does, so because it has life, how would it imagine it came into being? And I imagined that this painting was hanging in the halls of the Impressionist wing of the Art Institute of Chicago, where I spent a lot of time growing up, and that maybe there's some picnicker paintings in the background, but then also these people who stand before the work taking photos, and trying to insert myself in a kind of history that I can get behind within the kind of art historical narrative. Now, I'm honored to be invited here through print media, and I really fell in love with art making through printmaking. I'm dyslexic, and I think that the way in which I see and think about an image really reflects well with the way the print process works. So for me, working in reverse is something that feels really natural, and then like this is a reduction woodblock print, and having to think in reverse or think backwards is something that I really enjoy and feels like it clicks with me. Plus, I really love how the community that builds in print shops and the kind of all hands on deck situation, and that there's something to where prints have an ability to sort of go out in the world in a very different way than a lot of work, and I'm able to share them with friends and make, sort of be able to make more money, and to be frank, like selling prints at a good clip than big paintings or big pieces, and it's always exciting to see them go out in the world like that. Now I'd like to share another piece that came from a residency that I did in New Orleans, which had a real profound, the city of New Orleans had a real profound effect on me, particularly the masquerade traditions with Mardi Gras and Second Life. And so I made my own sort of tunic. And the other thing that was happening while in the residency is that there was this Confederate monument that had been recently removed. And so I was having conversations with a lot of my fellow residents about, well, what should happen with these spaces, and with this, because the base of the monument is still sort of left standing there. And it occurred to me, after especially going to these second lines and seeing people dancing on rooftops, that what I thought should happen with these spaces is that they should be enacted upon as platforms for a living monument, for people to have performances or the like on top of these bases, to bring that history in a present way. So I did this performance and then exhibited it as a 2-channel video, and I'll play that for you now. It felt really great to be up there. And I was only there for about 20 minutes before a cop told me to get down. But yeah, it felt very right. So back to Carrizozo. We, 4 years ago, purchased these suites of buildings. We've got the old Cibolo Hotel, the old Ford Garage, and the historic Lyric Theater. Here's the theater at night. Here was the inside of the theater when we purchased it. And we haven't really done too much reservations, but we have opened up the doors to the theater and have had really beautiful variety of events in them. Here's, and on the left, or on the right of the picture is the Ford Garage, which is now my 5,000 square foot studio space. We play ping pong every afternoon. And then the building on the corner is the hotel. This is how it looked. It's probably in the worst shape. And so Mike cut a hole in the roof on the left there. You can see that sky at the top. And on the right here he is like throwing a radiator down onto the bonfire. That's the kind of rehabbing we do. And as promised, I want to tell you about MoMAZoZo. So MoMAZoZo is an art organization that Mike and I have, and we've had it for 8 years now, and it's open on Fridays from 12 to 1. Those are our kind of extensive hours. And you travel back here, and during MoMAZoZo, we do a variety of events. So we, on the left, we're having tumbleweed races, and on the right, we printed Carrizozo Blows t-shirts. Here's some AmeriCorps folk. We also do a glass recycling smashing game and reward trophies. Here are some of our artists in residence doing a roundtable discussion about their book, Intimate Disagreement is Life. So that leads me to the Artist in Residency program, which is now in its 4th year, and we've housed over 50 artists in residence. And I'm just gonna go through some slides of some of the artists that we've had here. And it's been an incredible program. We provide studio space and living space. There's no fee, but there's also no stipend at the moment. We collaborate with another couple to do this residency. And the thing that's surprised me the most is the way the town has embraced this residency. It's like, they'll come up to us and be like, when's our next artist in resident coming? And if an artist needs a scanner, we source that within the community. And there's this real feeling that people are kind of welcomed in a way that I hadn't quite anticipated. In fact, people are often, we're trying to like sell these artists real estate and stuff to populate the town. And this last one is Tikva, who I met in Cranbrook 5 years ago. So it was really great to have her there. So I'm going to end with my most recent body of work that is inspired by the yucca plant and its mutualistic relationship to its sole pollinator, the yucca moth. I think in these times, political times, let's say, I'm constantly aware of how important our attention is, and that I continually want to find inspirational sources for my attention. And when I learned about this beautiful relationship between this plant and this insect, I dove into making a series of work about that. So here you have these 24-foot figures that are embodiments of the yucca and yucca moth relationship in the stages of the flower, the pod, and the seed. One thing that I loved when I was learning about this relationship is how it almost sounded romantic, even in the scientific literature. Like this moth and this flower could not live together, and the moth rolls this sticky pollen under her chin and inserts it in a fresh flower, and that there was just all this sort of sexual tension, if you will, within this understanding. And then in this exhibition, I also have this series called the Naturalist Collection. And I read this book by Carolyn Finney, White Spaces, Black Faces, reimagining African Americans' relationship to the land, which helped me sort of identify myself as a naturalist, because I think so many African Americans have, rightfully so, problematic relationships to the land based on Jim Crow, slavery, and then exclusion from environmental movements and the National Park Service. But I like this idea of these kind of collection of focus, and each of these, they have a faux wood block printed border, and then that drop shadow is sort of painted off, so it kind of pops from the wall. Here are some yucca prints that are woodblock prints, and utilizing the ghost as well for us printmakers in here. And Mike and I collaborated on a Yucca Moth, which sort of had a motorized ability to fly in the space, and was a great kind of way to bring people in from the outdoors in this iteration. So I'm going to end now with a video that, So also in that show, we had some work that kind of trying to bring the domestic space within the gallery setting. And so we integrated furniture with paintings and prints. And then there was this bed with this faux wood grain print, and then cantilevered over that is a little video playing of us doing these Adobe butt seats. And now I'm going to end with the video titled "Spread Wild, Pleasures of the Yucca." It's 2.5 minutes, I think. So thank you very much.